Market rates, Brandon said, his voice flat as he glanced up from my salary adjustment request. That single phrase hit me like a server crash at 2 a.m., sudden, devastating, and completely avoidable if someone had been paying attention. These new graduates bring fresh perspectives, contemporary skills, he continued, leaning back in his leather chair that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. They've been trained on modern frameworks. You've had to learn legacy systems on the job. Legacy systems. That's what he called the entire network infrastructure I'd built from scratch. 7 years. 7 years I had spent designing the backbone that his father's company ran on, working 60-hour weeks, configuring subnet architectures, optimizing database clusters, while these fresh perspectives were still figuring out which end of an Ethernet cable plugged into what. The new kid is making $87,000, I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. An email had been accidentally forwarded to me the week before, a compensation breakdown for the recent hire cohort. The numbers had burned into my memory like bad sectors on a hard drive. I designed the server architecture they're using, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I wrote the documentation they're learning from. I configured the network protocols that keep this place running. Brandon leaned forward, his expression unchanged. Vincent, the market has shifted. Your compensation reflects when you were hired, not current conditions. We value your contributions, but this is business, not personal. We value your contributions, not personal. The same phrase he'd used when denying my last 3 requests for a raise. When I'd missed my son Carlos's championship baseball game to handle the emergency database migration that saved them $200,000 in downtime costs. When I'd worked through the flu to meet a client deadline his father Charles had promised without consulting the technical team. My name is Vincent Rodriguez, and until that Friday afternoon, I was the most loyal network engineer TechCore Industries had ever hired. I'm 48 years old, been there since I was 41, employee number 12 when we barely had 30 people total. Now I'd watched the company grow to over 180 employees with offices in Denver and Phoenix. I'd been there when we couldn't make payroll, and Charles Walsh, the founder, had asked us to defer half our salaries for 2 months while he secured emergency funding. I'd been there when our first major client threatened to pull their $2 million contract because of system outages, and I'd spent 4 days straight rebuilding their integration architecture to save the relationship. I'd been there when Charles's wife died of cancer, and I'd managed both our server maintenance and his technical responsibilities for weeks without complaint. During those early startup years, Charles had felt like family. We're building something revolutionary together, he'd say during late nights when we'd order pizza and plan the company's technical roadmap. When we make it big, we all make it big. But success changed things. Or maybe it just revealed what had always been there underneath. When the company hit its first $1 million in revenue, Charles bought himself a 40-foot sailing yacht. When we hit $10 million, Brandon got promoted to VP of Operations despite having 0 technical background. His MBA from Daddy's alma mater apparently qualified him to make decisions about systems he couldn't spell, let alone understand. My salary had increased by just 14% over 7 years, despite the company's exponential growth and my increasing responsibilities. Each time I'd asked about advancement to senior systems architect, the answer was always some version of soon or next quarter or after this major deployment. I'd believed them. That was the hardest part to swallow. I'd actually believed them. But as I sat in my kitchen that Friday night looking at my mortgage statement, $2,847 monthly on a modest 3-bedroom house in Thornton, and my kids' college fund balance that wouldn't cover 1 semester at Colorado State, something fundamental shifted inside me. Not in a way that meant defeat. In a way that brought the kind of clarity you get when you finally isolate a network issue that's been plaguing you for months. See, I had senior-level system administrator privileges. Had them for years because I'd built half the infrastructure this company ran on. And being the guy who managed their database clusters and maintained their file servers, well, sometimes you see things. Email chains that weren't meant for your eyes. Database queries that reveal more than intended. Files that get accidentally shared in the wrong network directories. 3 months ago, while performing routine server maintenance and clearing out old temp files, I'd stumbled across something in a shared folder labeled Executive Strategy Documents. Inside was an email thread between Brandon, his father Charles, and Patricia Stone, our HR director. The subject line read, Tenure Cost Management Analysis, Q3 Review. Brandon had written, Vincent's compensation issue came up again during budget planning. Keep him at current level. He's too valuable in his current position to promote, and frankly, he's unlikely to leave. He's got a family, mortgage payments, and the sunk cost is too high for him to walk away. Standard 2% annual adjustment only. Apply this same retention strategy to all employees with 5+ years tenure. Charles had replied, Agreed. Market rate compensation only for new hires to stay competitive in recruitment. Existing staff retention through emotional investment, not financial. They had been deliberately underpaying me because they thought I wouldn't leave, because I had kids to feed, a mortgage to pay, and 15 years until retirement. Because my loyalty and family obligations were weaknesses they could systematically exploit. That's when I realized I wasn't just an employee getting screwed over. I was a case study in corporate manipulation. I called my buddy Daniel Foster that night. He'd left TechCore 2 years ago to start his own practice, employment law specifically. Smart guy, former Air Force like me, understood how chains of command could screw over the people doing the actual work. That's wage suppression, he said immediately after I read him the email. Classic case. And if they're doing it to you, they're doing it to others. Do you have access to the payroll database? I have root access to everything, I said, staring at my laptop screen. That's part of the problem. I built most of their security infrastructure. Vincent, this sounds like the kind of conversation we should have face to face. Meet me at Murphy's Tavern tomorrow night, the one on Federal Boulevard. Murphy's was a dive bar on the other side of Denver, nowhere near the tech corridor where TechCore people might hang out. When I arrived Saturday evening, Daniel was in a back booth nursing a Coors and scrolling through something on his tablet. You sounded serious on the phone, he said, as I slid into the worn vinyl seat across from him. Dead serious. I pulled out printouts of the email threads I'd found. His expression darkened as he read through them, occasionally muttering something under his breath that sounded distinctly military in nature. This is systematically screwed up, he said finally. How many other people do you think this affects? That's what I need to find out, and that's why I called you. Daniel studied me for a long moment, rotating his beer bottle slowly. What exactly are you thinking of doing? I need to run a comprehensive compensation analysis. Everyone who's been there more than 2 years compared to new hires in equivalent positions. I want to see the full scope of this thing. If you have legitimate administrative access to that data as part of your job responsibilities, then analyzing it isn't illegal, he said carefully. What you do with that analysis afterward, well, that's where things get complicated. Complicated how? Depends on your approach. Internal whistleblowing is protected under federal law. Going public, that requires more strategic thinking. Daniel leaned forward and lowered his voice. But sometimes doing the right thing isn't about what's legal or safe. Sometimes it's about what's necessary. He gave me a meaningful look. You just have to be smart about execution. By Sunday evening, I had everything I needed. 7 years of database administration privileges meant I knew exactly where TechCore kept their payroll data and how to extract it without leaving obvious fingerprints in the system logs. The SQL queries took about 20 minutes to run. The results took my breath away. Every single employee who'd been with the company more than 3 years was being paid significantly below current market rates, on average 43% below. New hires were brought in at market rate or above market. The longest tenured employees were getting screwed the hardest. Jennifer Cruz, our senior database administrator who'd been there 6 years, was making $52,000. Austin Kim, the kid they'd hired 3 weeks ago to do essentially the same job, was pulling down $78,000. Kevin Morrison, our network security specialist with 5 years' experience, was at $61,000. The fresh graduate they'd brought in last month to work under him was starting at $84,000. It wasn't just me. It was systematic. As I compiled the data into spreadsheets, cross-referencing performance reviews with compensation history, my hands were actually shaking. This wasn't about one disgruntled employee anymore. This was about dozens of people being deliberately and systematically exploited. The pattern was so clear it might as well have been written in neon. Hire people at reasonable rates. build their emotional investment through company culture and family rhetoric, gradually fall behind market rates through minimal annual increases, count on family obligations, mortgages, and career inertia to keep them trapped, bring in new talent at current market rates to maintain competitive edge, rinse and repeat. I had a choice to make. I could quietly find another job, probably get that 50% market adjustment I deserved, and walk away from Brandon and Charles Walsh's exploitation machine. Keep my head down, take care of my family, let everyone else figure out their own problems. Or I could do something that would change everything. Sitting there in my home office at 11:30 p.m. on a Sunday, looking at spreadsheets that documented years of systematic wage theft, I thought about Carlos and Sophia. My son was starting to look at colleges, talking about engineering programs that cost $35,000 a year. My daughter Sophia was showing real talent for computer science, already talking about following in my footsteps. What kind of industry was I leaving for them? One where loyalty was punished and experience was devalued, where companies could build fortunes on the backs of dedicated employees and then tell them they should be grateful for scraps? I thought about my father, who'd worked 30 years for the same manufacturing company before they restructured his department away and eliminated his pension. About my brother Miguel, who'd spent 15 years with a construction firm before they replaced him with younger workers at half his wage. This wasn't just about tech-core industries. This was about a system that treated people like disposable resources. I made my decision. Monday morning, I woke up at 4:30 a.m. with the kind of clarity I hadn't felt in years. Not nervous energy, focused determination. I dressed carefully in my best shirt and slacks, like I was going to a job interview. In a way, I guess I was. I drove to the office in the pre-dawn darkness thinking about network security protocols and database backup procedures and all the technical knowledge I'd accumulated over 7 years. Knowledge that had built Brandon's father a very profitable company. The building was empty when I badged in at 5:15 a.m., just the way I'd planned it. Vicente, the night security guard, was doing his final rounds. "Early start today, Vincent?" he called out as I headed for the elevator. "Big day ahead," I replied, and for the first time in months, I was actually smiling. The server room hummed quietly as I logged into the main administrative console. Time to put my access privileges to good use. One last time. I went straight to Brandon's corner office, the one with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Denver. His father Charles had given him the second best office in the building when he'd made him VP. Nepotism with a view. I placed a sealed manila envelope directly on Brandon's ergonomic chair, not on his desk where his assistant might find it, but on the seat where only he would see it when he sat down for his 7 o'clock a.m. coffee routine. Inside that envelope were 3 things: my resignation letter effective immediately, a printed copy of his email about keeping me underpaid, and a USB drive containing something that would change everything. A complete compensation analysis showing exactly how many employees were getting systematically screwed. But I wasn't finished. I walked back to my workstation in the server room and opened my laptop one final time as a TechCore employee. The email I'd drafted the night before was already queued, addressed to every employee who'd been with the company more than 2 years. 34 people total, including Jennifer, Kevin, and a dozen other folks who'd been grinding it out while watching fresh graduates get hired at premium salaries. The subject line read, "Why You're Being Underpaid, The Truth About TechCore's Compensation Strategy." In the body, I'd included key highlights from my analysis: average wage gaps, specific examples with names removed, and Brandon's own words about exploiting employee loyalty for cost savings. I'd attached the full compensation report with a note. Ask yourself why Austin Kim makes $78K while Jennifer Cruz makes $52K for the same job. Ask yourself why loyalty is rewarded with stagnant wages while inexperience gets market rates. My cursor hovered over the send button. Was I really going to detonate this bomb? Expose the company I'd helped build from practically nothing? Burn every bridge I had in the local tech community? Then I remembered Brandon's words. This is business, not personal. I pressed send. After that, I took one last walk through the office space. I passed the network closet where I'd spent countless nights during system migrations. I touched the conference room door where I'd presented my first infrastructure proposal with sweating palms and a voice that cracked from nervousness. So many memories. So much of my professional life invested in these walls. By 6:45 a.m., I was sitting in my Honda Accord in the parking lot, watching the early arrivals trickle in. At precisely 7 o'clock a.m., I knew Brandon would be walking into his office with his usual grande latte and superiority complex. At 7:05, my phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer. "Holy crap, Vince. Is this email for real?" At 7:07, my personal phone rang. Brandon's name on the caller ID. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again immediately. Declined. A text message. "What the hell is this? Call me right now." I turned off my phone. By 7:30, my personal Gmail was lighting up with responses from colleagues. Kevin from Network Security. "I knew something was wrong when the new kid started making more than me. Thank you for having the guts to expose this." Patricia from Accounting. "Is there any way to get copies of our individual compensation histories? I want to see exactly how much they've been screwing me." At 8 o'clock a.m., Brandon called my personal cell from a different number. This time I answered. "You have 30 seconds to explain yourself before I have you arrested for corporate espionage," he hissed, his voice shaking with rage. "Actually," I replied, keeping my voice steady, "I have documented evidence of systematic wage suppression that I'd be happy to share with the Colorado Department of Labor, or we can discuss a more civilized solution." "What kind of solution?" His tone shifted from rage to wariness. "Meet me at the Starbucks on 16th Street in 90 minutes. Come alone and bring someone from legal if you want. We're going to talk about how to fix this mess before it gets worse." "Worse? You think it can get worse than what you've already done?" "Brandon, I sent that email to 34 people. If you don't think this can get worse, you're even more clueless than I thought." The Starbucks was neutral territory, busy enough that neither of us would try anything stupid, public enough that everything would stay professional. I arrived 15 minutes early and claimed a corner table with clear sightlines to the entrance. Brandon walked in at exactly 9:30, accompanied by Patricia Stone from HR and someone I didn't recognize, probably their lawyer. His face was flushed red and he moved like a man who'd been drinking coffee for 3 hours straight. "You've completely lost your mind," he said, sliding into the chair across from me while Patricia and the lawyer flanked him. "Do you have any idea the chaos you've created, the damage you've done?" "I've simply shared factual information that your employees had a right to know," I replied calmly. "Information about how you've been systematically exploiting their dedication." "That information was confidential and proprietary," the lawyer interjected. "You had no legal right to access or distribute it. I had administrative access as part of my job responsibilities," I said. "And wage transparency is protected speech in Colorado. But we're not here to argue about legalities." I pulled out a folder and placed it on the small round table between us. "We're here to discuss how you're going to fix this before it gets completely out of control." Brandon stared at the folder like it contained anthrax. "What's in there?" "A comprehensive compensation adjustment plan that brings every affected employee up to current market rates, with retroactive adjustment for the most egregious cases. Also included is a commitment to transparent compensation policies going forward." "You're insane if you think we're going to bankrupt the company over this," Patricia said. "I've run the numbers based on your recent quarterly reports," I replied. "The company can easily afford these adjustments using last quarter's profit margins. It would reduce executive bonuses for 2 quarters, nothing more." I pushed the folder across the table. "Implement this plan by Friday, and I'll delete all the backup copies of data I've collected. I'll sign an NDA. This whole thing goes away quietly." "And if we refuse?" Brandon asked. "Then by tomorrow morning, your investors, your major clients, and the Colorado Department of Labor will all receive comprehensive documentation of your wage suppression practices, along with a detailed analysis of how this violates both federal and state employment laws." The lawyer whispered something urgently in Brandon's ear. "I need time to review this," Brandon said finally. "You have until 5 o'clock p.m. Thursday. After that, my attorney starts making phone calls." As Brandon and his legal team stormed out of the Starbucks, my phone was already buzzing with texts from Jennifer. Emergency all-hands meeting called for 11 o'clock a.m. "What did you do?" I didn't respond. Instead, I drove home to wait. By noon, messages were flooding my personal email from colleagues who'd attended the meeting. According to Kevin, Brandon had stood in front of the entire company and announced a comprehensive compensation review due to recently identified inconsistencies in our pay structure. He'd promised that adjustments would be made by the end of the week to ensure internal equity and market competitiveness. The wording was corporate bullshit, but the message was clear. They were caving. That evening, I received a formal email from TechCore's legal department confirming my resignation had been accepted and offering a separation package worth 6 months' salary in exchange for signing a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement. I forwarded the email to Daniel and called him. "They're scared," he said after reading it. 6 months severance for someone they claim committed corporate espionage? That's hush money. Should I take it? That depends. Do you want this to end here, or do you want to see how far it goes? I thought about Carlos, who'd be starting college applications next year. About Sophia, who was already asking me about computer science programs. About our mortgage and Maria's part-time teaching job and all the practical reasons why a 48-year-old man with a family shouldn't burn bridges with his industry connections. I want to see how far it goes, I said. I declined the offer. The next morning, 4 more employees resigned. By Thursday afternoon, the deadline I'd given Brandon, the number had grown to 11. All long-term employees who'd finally learned their true market value and found better opportunities elsewhere. At 4:47 p.m. on Thursday, 13 minutes before my deadline, I received a call from Charles Walsh himself, the company founder, Brandon's father, the man whose handshake deals and late-night pizza sessions had once made me feel like family. "Vincent," he said, his voice tired in a way I'd never heard before. "Can we talk?" "That depends on what you want to talk about. I want to implement your compensation plan. All of it. Retroactive adjustments, transparency policies, the works." I was quiet for a long moment. "Why now?" "Because my son is an arrogant idiot who nearly destroyed everything I spent 20 years building," Charles said bluntly. "Because I just lost my best network security specialist and my senior database administrator in the same week. Because our biggest client is asking questions about our staffing stability." He paused. "And because you were right. We screwed you over, and you deserved better." "What about Brandon?" "Brandon is taking an extended leave of absence to reassess his career priorities. I'm resuming direct operational control." 2 weeks later, every affected employee received compensation adjustments, bringing them to current market rates, plus retroactive pay covering the previous 2 years. Jennifer got bumped from $52,000 to $79,000 with $27,000 in back pay. Kevin went from $61,000 to $89,000 with a similar adjustment. But the exodus continued anyway. Once people realize they've been systematically undervalued, once they understand their true worth in the market, it's hard to rebuild trust. By the end of the month, TechCore had lost 18 long-term employees, nearly half their experienced technical staff. Meanwhile, my phone was ringing constantly with job offers. Word had spread through Denver's tight-knit tech community about what had happened at TechCore. Not the details, those were covered by NDAs and legal settlements, but the general story of a senior engineer who'd stood up to wage suppression and won. Some hiring managers saw me as a troublemaker to avoid. Others saw me as exactly the kind of principled technical leader they wanted on their teams. 3 weeks after my resignation, I accepted a position as senior network architect at Pinnacle Solutions, a growing cybersecurity firm. The salary was $94,000, 62% more than I'd been making at TechCore. The benefits were comprehensive. More importantly, they had transparent compensation policies and annual market rate reviews. But the real victory came 6 months later. I received an email from an HR director I'd never met at a company I'd never heard of in Phoenix. "You don't know me," she wrote, "but your story has been making rounds in our industry network. Last month, our leadership team proactively conducted a comprehensive compensation audit to ensure internal equity. We found several issues and made immediate corrections. Thank you for starting a conversation that needed to happen." That email wasn't unique. Over the following year, my LinkedIn inbox filled with similar messages from strangers across the tech industry. People who'd heard my story secondhand and been inspired to investigate their own compensation situations. HR professionals who'd pushed for transparency initiatives. Managers who'd fought for market rate adjustments for their teams. I hadn't set out to become a workplace justice advocate. I'd just been a 48-year-old engineer who got tired of being taken advantage of. But somehow, my refusal to accept less than I was worth had rippled outward in ways I never could have predicted. A year after leaving TechCore, I was invited to speak at a Rocky Mountain Technology Association conference about fair compensation practices. Standing at the podium, Looking out at an audience of CTOs and senior engineers, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: professional respect. "I'm not here to tell you to blow up your careers," I began. "I'm here to tell you that knowing your worth isn't selfish. It's essential for the entire industry to function properly." During the Q&A, a young woman in the third row raised her hand. "How did you find the courage to risk everything?" I considered the question carefully. It wasn't courage exactly. It was exhaustion with accepting less than I deserved. There's a tipping point where staying quiet becomes more painful than speaking up. I just reached mine. After the talk, that same young woman approached me. She worked at a major Denver tech company and had discovered patterns of wage disparity similar to what I'd uncovered at TechCore. "We want to do something," she said, "but we're afraid of retaliation." I gave her Daniel's card and promised to help however I could. 6 months later, her company announced a comprehensive compensation review and transparency initiative. No drama, no resignations, no public confrontations. Just quiet, systematic change driven by employees who understood their worth and weren't afraid to demand it. That's how real change happens. Not through grand gestures or viral moments, but through individuals deciding they deserve better and having the patience to make it happen strategically. Today, Carlos is in his junior year at Colorado School of Mines, studying computer engineering. Sophia just started her senior year of high school and is already talking about cybersecurity programs. Maria and I finally refinanced the house at a better rate. Sometimes people ask me if I regret how things went down at TechCore. The answer is no. Not because the outcome was perfect, but because the alternative, staying quiet, accepting less, teaching my kids that loyalty means letting people take advantage of you, was unacceptable. The most powerful thing you can leave behind isn't a resignation letter or a database full of evidence. It's proof that standing up for yourself is possible, and sometimes that's enough to change everything.